Hey guys, how's it going? Robert Warshak here, and in this video I'm going to be going over the monthly meta. So basically, what are the most popular decks you're going to see on ladder when you play Hearthstone? So when you hit that ranked button, 90-95% of the time when you play against a class, you can break it down into some of one or two or three of these decks that we're going to cover. The reason why this video, we normally make this video at the beginning of every month, but the reason it was delayed, just because there was the new expansion, which already takes, a couple weeks to figure out. Then they had the nerfs, which changed up everything again. So I wanted to make sure I waited a sizable amount of time before making this video, so I don't post any decks, have you guys craft those decks, and those decks fall off, or they're actually not very popular. It was only played for that one day. And there's quite a few decks that were like that. Quest Hunter, for example, was one of them. The deck was exceedingly super popular for like 2 or 3 days, and then I've never seen it since then. So I'm glad, we've waited, and that's exactly why we do that. So the first class we're going to talk about is going to be the Hunter, but more specifically Deathrattle Hunter. Pretty expensive deck overall, but honestly, in probably my top 3 of best decks right now. I mean, it's just insane. It has everything it needs to win. It's got great early game. It has great mid towards the middle game. It has great late game. It has burst because you're able to cube cards like, King Crush, Cathena, Charged Devilsaur, Witchwood Grizzly if you need to be defensive. Play dead it, 1 mana. To be able to summon 2 7/7s with charge, or King Crush if it's an 8/8. I mean, it's just insane. This is why this deck has been around for, I think, 2 metas now, or 2 expansions. And it's why it's played so much at ladder, why it's played so much in tournaments. Probably, one of the more popular hunter lists. I know Secret Hunter and No Minion Hunter are slowly dying off in replace of the Master's Call Hunter, the Midrange Hunter, the Hybrid Hunter, and this particular hunter list has always been popular. This one never died off or has gotten more popular. It's just remained consistent. I mean, it's just a really good deck, and I'm sure you guys have seen it on ladder. I know it's not the cheapest deck to build, looking at that does count, because it does run a sizable amount of legendaries and epics, but, if you're looking to play one of the better hunter lists, or if you're a veteran coming back and you happen to have some of these cards, this is the hunter list that you want to move to. The next hunter list we're going to talk about is going to be the No Minion or / Spell Hunter. This is the one that was originally exceedingly popular. Now it's starting to die off, but it's still really popular on ladder. Hunter, for example, I mean, Hunter is just popular in itself on ladder, and there's like 4, 5, 6 different renditions of Hunter right now. So these lists won't be exact because there's just so much Hunter right now. I'm 30 to 35% of all games I've played in the past month have been against Hunter. And then, you got the Secret Hunter, this No Spell Hunter, the Deathrattle Hunter, the Hybrid Hunter, the Midrange Hunter. So if you're like, hey, Rob, my Spell Hunter doesn't play deadly shots. It's like, well, Spell Hunter doesn't have to play deadly shots, but the key of the deck is it runs no minions, and you run Rock Dalar and Zul'jin and Rexxar. All of that is what makes the deck. Running 2 deadly shots isn't the point of the deck. That's more just a card you could put in there for removal if you feel like it. So don't get bogged down on 1 or 2 different cards, guys, as we see every monthly meta. There's someone like, oh, you ran tracking. That's totally wrong. It's not Secret Hunter anymore. It's like, oh. So with that, this deck, again, runs no minions. So how does it win? It generates minions and generates value through cards like playing your secrets and playing Spellstone, which generates minions. Animal Companion generates minions. Death Star Rexxar generates minions, To My Side generates minions, and of course Zul'jin and Rock Dalar generate cards and even more minions. So it's a very powerful deck, even though you're like looking at it, you're like, how does it win? Oh, does this deck win? a lot of the time you can cheese out games and win by turn 6 just by, going Spellstone into To My Side and doing 20 plus damage in a single turn. Again, Flare, if you don't find yourself playing against as many hunters or secret hunters as you used to, you can take out Flare for more secrets. Or if you don't agree with the secrets that are in a deck, put in more Rat Traps, put in more Snipes, or Venom Strike. That's not the point. The point is you play secrets, you play Spellstones, you run no minions, crushing To My Side and Rock Dalar and all that good stuff, and you mow people down in the early game. It's just a super sick deck, super fun deck, probably one of the more one of the more fun hunter decks to play at the moment. Looking at the Master's Call / Midrange Hunter deck, this made it into our top 5, best, easiest decks to play to get to Legend or whatever rank you're looking to get. I explained it I'll explain it more detail in that video than this one, as this is more of just an overview of this is, one of the hunter decks that you're going to see. But what makes this deck so powerful is the fact that it has a substantially powerful early game. It's got great burst because of the Tundra Rhino, Unleash the Hound, Scavenging Hyena plays that you can do. I mean, you can burst your opponent down for 15 plus damage for, a very little amount of mana. And then plus, of course, playing a 1-drop and a 2-drop and a 3-drop, your opponent doesn't deal with that. You know, if they don't have removal till turn 5, you just win the game. Plus it, of course, has Death Star Rexar, which it allows your deck to go toe-to-toe with any control deck. So you sit there and you extinguish most of your hand pushing the early game, and then you Rexar on 6, and it's just like, all right, well, it's a brand new game now. I can make a minion and play it almost every single turn. So super sick, very, very good deck. Very cheap deck. All right, the next deck that we're going to cover is going to be the Secret Hunter. This is probably one of the least played of all of the Hunter decks, but still a Hunter deck I wanted to mention just because it is pretty popular. Sometimes, it depends on the day, but I find this to be some of the weaker Hunter deck. This is the weakest Hunter deck just because if your opponent is playing a control deck or a mid-range deck and they don't have to attack your secrets, like another aggro deck, for example, like Zoo or another Hunter deck, they're trying to do as much damage as they can as quickly as possible because their deck doesn't really make it to the late game that often. So they normally have to attack. But decks that don't have to attack and proc your secrets, this deck loses almost the entirety of its oomph, and then it starts to rely on cards like Spellstone, Rexar, and Zul'jin. And again, that you don't run. I mean, you do play this deck because of those cards, but you don't want to rely solely on a select few cards in your deck when you have 25 other cards in your deck. So when your opponent doesn't proc the secrets, that's when this deck really has trouble being able to do what it's meant to do, just because your opponent doesn't have to do that because they're playing, for example, a control deck that will win in either fatigue, or it'll just out resource them, or they're playing a combo deck and they'll just win in one turn. They don't need to wait and do periodic damage when their whole point is just mind blasting you twice for 40 damage. So the next class we're actually going to take a look at is going to be Priest. This is going to be the Asmo Priest, or like people say, the Miracle Priest, OTK Priest, Resurrect Priest. There's a bunch of different names for this particular deck. It has proven to be very consistent and one of the most popular, if not the most popular Priest deck. And, it's most commonly played very well and hit high legend by the streamer Asmo. Super cool guy. Great, fun to watch. One of the select few that I watch, and this deck super fun for those of you who played it. Super annoying to play against. Oh my gosh. Every time you play against this deck, it's just a rough time because if they're able to cloning gallery on turn, like 7 or 8 because they have Radiance or they have Gargoyles to give them extra coins, they summon more Radiance, they have Malygos, they have Velen, and they Mind Blast you down, from full health in one turn on turn 7. It feels kind of bad, but if you look at the deck, you can kind of see how it functions. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, just spawns a bunch of huge, very, very powerful minions. They use Spellstones to be able to bring those back, and they either kill you throughout attacking, or they just use Mind Blast, Holy Smites, Holy Nova. There's also cheesy things that you can do with Lyra. With all of the cheap spells in this deck, you're able to do crazy things with Lyra, generating more Mind Blast, generating more cards to summon more cards. I mean, this deck is just insane sometimes with the amount of value it generates, plus the amount of cheesiness you can do with generating random spells. Very fun deck. It's not the easiest deck to play though. Some people, some games are, you play this and you win, but some other games, it's a little bit more, you got to think about your stuff, because you're playing against, for example, maybe a control warrior. They have upwards, or a druid, and they have upwards of 70-80 life. You're like, all right, how do I put together a combo that can kill them over 1 or 2 turns, with given how much removal those decks have. Moving to the next Priest deck, a deck that actually fell off for quite some time and has now picked up steam again, and that's going to be the Combo Dragon Priest. The soul of this deck is to play Shadow Reaper Anduin, change your hero power to do 2 damage for 2 mana, and that can refresh itself once you play something, and then you Alex draws your opponent down from 30 to 15, and then you do a combination of Mind Blast, Hero Power, Mind Blast, Hero Power. You can use your Shadow Visions to get more Mind Blast, use most of your Drakes for AoE or for field advantage. From there, you've got Mass Hysteria and Psychic Scream to stall the game out for you to pull the combo pieces together to be able to do the burst damage needed. Beyond that, the deck doesn't do anything. There's no secondary win condition besides, just attacking your opponent and winning through, just normal Mind Blast, or just through, Twilight Drake damage or Scale Worm damage. It mostly relies on that Shadow Reaper Anduin, Alex Draza combo. And it's very consistent. I mean, there's a reason that this deck is one of the more popular priest decks at the moment. It seemingly does very, very good against Hunter because of cards like Dustbreaker and Mass Hysteria. It also isn't bad because it runs Cabal, Shadow Priest, and Twilight Alkalite. So for those of you who don't like playing against Q Block, you know, you can take their Void Lords with that combination of cards, and they don't get summoned back from Gul'dan because you actually take them. So pretty good deck. Very fun to play if you enjoy any sort of combo / priest deck. So moving to our next class, we've got the Warlock. More specifically, the Q block. This deck has been around for so long now. I think it's one of the most annoying decks to play against. Well, one of the more annoying decks to play against on ladder, because it's, again, one of those decks that if they draw really well, it's very, very hard to beat them. Let's say they tap in the early stages of the game, and then all of a sudden they coin out their weapon, which summons a free demon, and then it just goes like Doomguard, Void Lord, or Doomguard, Void Lord, or they have like Doomguard into like Carnivorous Cube into Dark Pact, and then you do like 10, 15, 20 damage in a singular turn. They play Gul'dan on 10 and summon back 7 Doomguards, and you just lose. You just lose. You get fucking obliterated. So. But there's some games where, you know, they don't draw the skull and they just don't get what they need, and you have all of these pieces of cards in your hand and they can't do anything. So it's very, very how you draw dependent with those decks. And then what makes a good Q block player distinct from a bad Q block player is like how they play out those matches when the game doesn't give them exactly what they need to be able to beat you, which happens more times than not. But, you know, you can definitely see, you know, this guy's played Q block before. You know, he just played Doomguard, doesn't have this, you know, the weapon in his hand, but yet he still won because he judged, you know, I've got to play this now and then combo with here. So, you know, and how they use their cubes, you know, what they use their cubes on, when they clear with Joffrey, all of these are important factors. So there's definitely a bracket between the players who just play this deck because it's really good and it carries them, versus the players that spend the time to learn the deck and understand the intricacies, you know, to certain combination of cards and when to use them. So very good deck. It's been around for a long time, ton of burst, and it's a very annoying deck to play against in general, and it's annoying because it's so good. The next deck we're going to cover is an Even Warlock. This actually used to be the most popular. Now it's actually, I think, a little bit less popular than the Cube. I see a Cube block a lot more than I've seen the Even Lock, but it's definitely still a deck that you need to worry about and look at and understand. The ability to pay 1 mana to draw a card for 2 health is very, very powerful. And then basically it's just, you know, Twilight Drakes and Mountain Giants on turn 3, turn 4. You know, the turn 6 is filled up with playing mostly 6/6s, 6/5s. You know, turn 8's filled with Lich King and Bone Mares. And then turn 10 is mostly Gul'dan because they've drawn, you know, through so much of their deck the whole game. They normally have a lot of these things exactly on curve, which is very, very hard to deal with. They're constantly playing big minions, constantly asking for answers. And if you just don't deal with it, you're going to lose because you're just going to take a substantial amount of damage. So if you're looking for more of like not necessarily a control deck, but not necessarily an aggro deck, you know, even Warlock is going to be, you know, what feels nice there. And we've seen this deck, you know, brought to a ton of tournaments. This deck consistently hits Legend. We see it played at High Legend. I mean, it's just a very consistent, very well-rounded deck that does, you know, good work against most classes and most decks. Moving on to the Warrior. Ooh, my favorite class. We've got the Odd Quest Control Warrior. This is the most popular of the Control Warrior builds right now, and that's just because, you know, when you complete the Fire Plume's Heart after playing 7 taunt minions, you're able to change your hero power from, you know, the gain 4 armor to 2 mana, deal 8 damage to a random enemy minion or to their face directly, and it just puts your opponent on a clock, you know. When you're spending 2 mana and dealing 8 damage, you kill them, you know, let's say they're at 4, let's say they're at full health, it's going to take 4 turns to kill them. But most of the time you're able to deal a little bit of chip damage before that, just because your minions are pretty resilient and you have time. So most of the time you can kill them in 2 or 3 turns. And then on top of that, this deck runs the Blackwall Pixie, or at least this is my rendition of the deck. Some versions don't run Pixie. They find it not very good. I love it because a lot of decks don't expect it, and there's nothing better than playing cards your opponent doesn't expect. Dealing 16 damage bursts in a single turn without ever attacking is so powerful, especially against a lot of these OTK decks that are around. You know, the Mechathune decks. I've seen a lot of Mechathune Priest, a ton of OTK, you know, 4 Horseman Paladin decks. So being able to do that sort of burst damage that they don't expect is very key to winning. Also in the mirror matchup, it's perfectly great. It's perfect and it's great, perfectly great. And then also against, you don't even have to use Blackwalled Pixie just for when you complete the quest. If you're playing against an aggressive base hunter deck, or you're playing against an odd rogue, or you're playing against an odd paladin, and you need to gain 8 armor in a single turn, hero power, Pixie hero power is a great play to stop from taking damage. That's a third, almost a third of your health you've gained. And you've developed a minion. So what makes this deck so good is it's wonderful. This deck is so good against aggro, and on top of that, it's very powerful against other control decks, because this deck will just keep hitting them for 8 every single turn. If they can't deal with it, like, what do they do? Like, there's only so much healing in a deck, right? There's only so many minions they can play, unless they're like a hunter and they or they Rexar and then they summon a minion. They're able to play a minion every turn, and you deal 8 every turn. You're just kind of at a stalemate of killing one or going face, and eventually, technically, they'll die if it keeps hitting face, but so will you, because you're not killing the minions on the board. So, that's why this particular rendition is so popular right now. A little expensive, but very fun. If you like warrior, it's a good, nice deck to have. Moving on to Shaman. This is another deck that made it to our, top 5 easiest legend decks to play, and there's a reason for that. It's been around in the meta for a really long time. It has everything it needs to be able to do very well in the early game. It has everything it needs to do well in the mid game, and it has everything it needs to do well in the late game. Hagatha is a card that goes, again, another card that can go toe-to-toe with control decks, because every time you play a minion, you generate a random Shaman card, and that Shaman card, as we know, we could copy minions, summon more minions, give minions Deathrattle that return to your hand. I mean, it's just tons of value with Hagatha, but looking more at the early game, because that's when the even Shaman has and again, it's one of those decks that can just blow your opponent out. You start with, like, let's say Primal Fin Totem, you go coin Primal Fin Totem into Flame Tongue Totem. All of a sudden you're doing anywhere between 4 to 6 damage to your opponent every turn with just 2 cards that cost 2 mana each, which is insane. You also have cards like Knife Juggler, Spark Eel that does periodic / nice chip damage. You've got cards like Corpse Taker with if left unchecked, it's 6 damage just by itself, because it has most of the time Wind Fury from Alakir. But you can also put your Flame Tongue Totem next to it, Direwolf Alpha. You can Earthen Might it, and that can do upwards of 10 to 14 damage burst on just turn 4 or 5, depending on if you've coined it out or not. So very well-rounded deck. Again, I play this card. You don't deal with it, I'm gonna play another card. You don't deal with it, all right, you lose the game. So if you, again, a lot of these decks that just keep pushing the monsters out and doesn't have a lot of spells in the deck, and it just asks for answers, and if your opponent doesn't have them, they lose. These decks are normally, the best decks in the game, and the easiest to play. Again, we made that, top 5, best / easiest decks to hit legend with, and I kind of follow suit in that exact thought process, and I explain that a little bit further. Looking at Odd Rogue, again, there wasn't a lot of Shaman at the time, or at this time, before we had like Shutter Shaman, but again, that kind of fell off. So if you're wondering, hey, why isn't there more Shaman decks, or like, hey, where is this particular class? It's because, 1, either those decks aren't very popular, or 2, that deck doesn't exist. You've seen it once or twice, and you're like, oh, I love this deck, but it doesn't actually, like, we're talking like, what are we seeing 90 to 95% on ladder, not what, we've seen once at rank, 36, on a Saturday night at 3 o'clock in the morning. All right. Odd Rogue, this is the exact list I was able to, make it to legend with an 82% win rate. Very solid deck. Again, very minion heavy, very little spells. Play a minion every turn. Your opponent doesn't deal with it, they lose. What makes this deck so powerful, though, is the dagger. Being able to spend 2 mana and get a 2/2 dagger. So you're spending 2 mana to deal 4 damage. Or you can use that 4 damage on minions, which allow your minions to freely hit your opponent in the face, which is the goal, to get them down to 0 as quickly as possible. For those of you who are wondering, hey, I don't have like Captain Greenskin, I don't have Myra's Element, what do I replace with these cards? You can go ahead and put in like another Tar Creeper or a Blink Fox. This is just the build that I've made up. There's plenty of builds that don't run those cards. There's plenty of builds that do. So don't get too bogged down on specific 1 or 2 cards and deck guides. Look at the deck as a whole. It's, you know what I mean? And if you can't get 1 or 2 of these, even 3, 4, you can replace them with other things, but the deck will still function as intended because the foundation of the deck is there. But Odd Rogue has been really popular for a long time. It hasn't really changed a whole lot. And I don't want to explain it too much because I know you guys are probably tired of that, but very powerful deck. And if you want to see more of this particular deck, you can go on the channel in our most recent videos, and there should be a couple games, I think 1 or 2 videos of Odd Rogue of us hitting Legend with it and how to play the deck. Moving on over to the even Paladin. It functions very, very, very similar to the even Shaman. You know, being able to weave in the hero powers. You have mostly minions in the deck. You have some spells, probably a little bit more spells in this deck than most of the other decks that are even or odd, just because Paladin has a sizable, you know, we've got Avenging Wrath, we've got Spikeridge Steed, we've got Consecration. So there's equality. There's really good spells for the Paladin on that even mark. Overall, this deck has a lot of answers. So if you want to be able to, this isn't necessarily a control deck, and again, it's not necessarily like a super aggressive deck. It has the resources to clear boards. It has the resources to also outvalue with cards like Spikeridge Steed, Valenier, Lich King, and Dino Size. You look at Dino Size, you're like, Rob, why is it in there? I like playing, you know, it's a really cool card and won me tons of games. If you don't like Dino Size, you can put in Bone Mare. That's totally fine. I'm sure I'm going to comment on that. Like, Rob, Dino Size is so bad. It's like, well, you know, say that to my win rate with the deck, which is exceedingly high. But overall, again, just play minions early on. Corpse Taker is amazing. We see that in many of the even decks. We see that Corpse Taker has made its way into more decks than I ever thought possible. The card is itself very cool, but it took a while for it to reach the point where it's played a lot and works really well, and now is that time. There's not really much to explain about the even Paladin. It's a fun deck, but probably not as fun as some of the other decks that we've covered. I don't know, it's just my personal opinion. We need to cover it because it's a really popular deck, but it's definitely not one of my favorites in regards to like play style or anything like that. The next deck, the OTK Paladin. The OTK Paladin did exist before Boomsday, but it wasn't great. It was okay. It was more of like a meme sort of OTK, but now that it got the timeout and a lot of utensils to be able to live substantially longer between, again, timeout, Shavala the Tiger, a combination of like, you know, Linessa and Spikeridge Steed, you know, Flash a Light for draw, and the Crystal Smith to be able to heal for double. And this deck has now turned into quite an annoying deck to play against, and very, very good. I mean, this deck has the ability to win against aggro decks. It destroys aggro decks. This has the ability to win against other mid-range decks because it has the tools to clear the board, and mid-range decks are slightly slower than aggro, so has time to put the pieces together to build the walls it needs to survive and draw the card it needs to clear the board. And it also wins against other control decks because once this deck pulls together the combo, which is playing Uther, you know, using Uther's hero power to make the Horseman, bouncing the Horseman back to your hand with Ancient Brewmaster and Zola, and then playing all 4 Horsemen to instantaneously win the game, regardless of your opponent's health or how many cards are in the deck or what they've played or what they've done or anything about the game whatsoever. You just win. You know, other control decks have a very tough time defeating that. Believe it or not, winning the game on the spot is really, really tough to beat. And then if you look at the deck list, you look at the early game and the mid game, it's honestly all about draw and field clear. I mean, we've got cards like Flashlight to draw, Loot Hoarder to draw. We've got Call to Arms to pull Wild Pyromancers, Loot Hoarders, and Righteous Protectors from the deck. So we're drawing, we're clearing the board, we're thinning out our deck. We've got cards like Spikeridge Steed and Sunkeeper Tarim to be able to keep pressure going or to neutralize opponents' big minions. And we have Linessa as a huge wall, and then Shavala the Tiger in combination with Crystal Smith allows you to heal for 14 in a single turn. By most of the time, Shavala costs 0 mana, so it's a 0 mana heal for 14. Feels pretty good, and she's a 7/5. And if left unchecked, she's going to heal for another 14. And why I say 14 is because Crystal Smith doubles the healing. Normally, she would only heal for 7, but because Crystal Smith is out, normally those are 2 cards that you combine together, or like Crystal Smith and Flash of Light, or Crystal Smith and Uthar's Weapon. You know, these are the things that you combo together to get full value. Last Paladin deck we're going to cover, and I believe the last deck in total is going to be the Odd Paladin deck, another deck that reached our top 5, you know, easiest, best legend decks to play. This deck hasn't changed basically at all. A lot of people said when, you know, the level up got nerfed, this deck would be dead, but in fact, the deck, it lives on. It's probably one of the most popular of the Paladin decks. It's either, when I play against Paladins, I'm thinking Odd Paladin first, and then followed up by the even / possibly OTK. And, you know, summoning 2 dudes for 2 mana every turn is really, really good. It has all the same synergies it ever had, where they just replace the level up with Frostwolf Warlord, which is just a 5 mana most of the time, 7/7, 8/8, or 9/9, depending on how many minions they have on the board. So not only do we have to worry about the little guys, they've got big guys in the deck too. For late game, it's got Stormwind Champion and Vine Cleaver being one of the best weapons. Just for how much value it brings, you know, summoning, you know, being able to deal 4 damage and then summon 2 Silverhand recruits plus the hero power. So if they have this weapon out, they're summoning 4 guys in a single turn, every single turn for at least 4 turns or 3 turns, however many charges they have left on Vine Cleaver. And it's insane. I mean, this deck just has so many dudes that you always have to deal with. And again, if you're the opponent, it's, I can clear this board, I can clear this board, I can clear this board, but how many times can you do that before you just get run over? Because if a good odd paladin player will stagnate their resources, they won't just go throw up all on board unless they have Divine Favor in their hand, which says draw as many cards as your opponent has in your hand. So if your opponent is a good player and they've got lots of cards in their hand, you're like, oh baby, thank God they're good. And then you Divine Favor and spend 3 mana and draw like 7 or 8, and then you're able to throw all of that shit back up on the board and get back to, you know, going to town on your opponent's life points. So again, very cheap, 5,000 dust, pretty cheap. A very good deck, brought to a lot of tournaments, has proven to be very consistent, and has remained in the meta for quite some time. So with that, that covers all of the decks that we're going to cover in our monthly meta, the most popular decks. You could be like, hey Rob, where is Druid? I've played, since the nerf, I've played hundreds of games, I think close to 400 or 500 games now, maybe more, I'm not sure, I'm just making up some numbers right now, but it's hundreds, possibly millions. And I've faced, I think, 1 Druid. And the only other Druid that we've seen is when we play Druid. And of course I play Druid because no one else is playing Druid. So that's the perfect time to play Druid. And then as for Mage, there is an Odd Mage and then a Control Mage running around. But that is the that is the only other class that has the smallest like sample size as all the other decks. So if we play 50 games and we play against 1 Mage, that is not a popular deck to me at all. That is not considered popular. When we queue into ladder, what do we get 90-95% of the time? So for those of you who play Mage or wondering where Mage and Druid are, they just haven't made it into the monthly meta because they are not popular. And the reason they're not popular is because they're either too difficult to play or they're not good enough in regards to how difficult they are to play to get the wins that they need to be able to grind those ranks. So with that, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next episode and or on stream. As always, guys, I'm Robert Warshak, and happy whatever the hell day it is.